Hello folks, this is Bob Tauber again. This is part 2 of eating and sleeping disorders for online psychopathology. I really like talking about sleep disorders for lots of reasons. Besides experiencing my own long-term sleep disorder, lots of insomnia that I battled with, believe it or not, ever since the earthquake in Los Angeles in 1971, not the 1994 one, but when I was 21 years old, 1971. I just didn't sleep for 3 days, and in much of my life I've had lots of issues with insomnia. But another reason I like talking about sleep disorders, besides the fact it's something I have a lot of personal experience with, is that my first job after I graduated, my undergraduate degree was at UCLA, was up at Stanford Medical Center in the sleep disorders clinic. So I actually worked in a sleep disorders clinic, and it was both a clinical center and a research center where we were exploring sleep. It's interesting that the person who ran the clinic and was probably the most famous sleep researcher in the world at the time has a name that's William Dement. Yeah, I know. He's a psychiatrist, and his name is Dement, like demented. But he wasn't demented. He was really successful. He was a very famous person for several reasons, but mainly because I believe when he was in medical school, he hooked up with Nathaniel Kleitman, and they discovered the fact that there were two distinctly different kinds of sleep. Something most people know just by watching their children or their dogs sleep, but that there was a sleeping time where we didn't tend to dream, and that seemed to last for about, give or take, 60 minutes. And then we shifted into a time of sleep where our brains became very active, our respiration became very active, our heart rate became active, our eyes started moving rapidly in every which direction, and that was the time that if you woke somebody up, they would report dreams. And that is rapid eye movement sleep, REM sleep. So there was this Dement was one of the discoverers of that. Sleep consisted of a period of non-REM sleep where you're not dreaming. You're aware, there's consciousness if you get woken up, but there'll be like a vague description of a temperature or a light, but not a full-blown dream, and then dreaming sleep, REM sleep. So I think a lot of you probably have heard this difference between what's called non-REM sleep versus REM sleep. And again, REM stands for rapid eye movements, because that was one of there are many things that distinguish these two, but one of the main distinguishers is the eyes start tracking, and it turns out tracking the dream image. So I worked up there, and I got to experience just about every sleep disorder you could imagine. And sleep disorders are contained in the DSM, so that's one reason that you'll be studying them in this class, the psychopathology. Now, the other thing about sleep disorders that I find really interesting, besides the fact that I've suffered from my own, and believe me, this job didn't help because I was staying up all night monitoring other people's sleep, working up at Stanford. But besides the fact that I've experienced my own and also worked at the sleep clinic, I just find sleep to be an amazingly yellow, red flag symptom of so many other serious mental health challenges and other diagnoses. If you look at bipolar disorder, when somebody is moving towards a manic phase, they have no need for sleep. Their sleep is disrupted, and they might not sleep for 2, 3, 4, 5 days without getting tired. There's definitely a disruption in the sleep pattern. Sleep is also a part of a major depressive disorder. It's one of the potential criteria of the 5 of the 9 criteria, and it's like it could be insomnia. It's more likely waking up in the middle of the night, usually out of some sort of anxiety REM state, and having a really hard time getting back to sleep. It's called early morning awakening. So sleep disruptions are part of major depressive disorders. Like I said, bipolar disorders. Sleep disruptions are part of obsessive compulsive disorder if you're into checking or needing to go downstairs repeatedly and find out if the doors are locked or if the oven's off, whatever. If it's one of those things that's done at a very high level, then that's also, it shows up in sleep. Sleep also happens as kind of a warning sign for schizophrenia. A lot of times a person's sleep becomes very irregular. Sleep is connected with so many different anxiety disorders besides obsessive compulsive disorder, panic attacks, and so sleep is so much a sort of a like what I want to say, like a barometric symptom, like that's telling you that something else is going on. That when I was first in Santa Barbara and I was trying to get a private practice going, I decided that I would teach an adult ed and I teach a class on sleep and sleep disorders and dreams because it would help me get a private practice going because I thought that people with sleep disruptions might want to have issues that they need counseling for because it was such a common thing. And it really did happen that way. So in this class, adult ed class, which started in the afternoon, I want to tell you like a quick anecdote because I think I cured half the class in the first 10 minutes of the class. Most of the class, given that it was during the day on a weekday, were retired folks. And I would say, I actually have cards where people put their ages, but I'd say the average age of the class was about 70 to 75. And almost all the complaints, and I had people write their sleeping issues on a card, were not sleeping enough, not getting that 8 hours of sleep a night, and having fragmented sleep, where waking up lots of time during the night. So what I showed them, this is a psychoeducation cure, was that, and again, we could put this up on in a resource section, but if this is sleeping 24 hours a day and this is not sleeping at all, and this is the lifespan, and this is 50, and this is 100, we'll put 75 right there and 25 here. This is what happens to total sleep time as we age. Newborn sleep, on average, again, these are just averages, about 17 hours in a 24-hour period. 17. And by the time you'd be 90, it would be down to, let's see, this is about 12, this is about 5 right there. By the time you'd be 90, it would be down to about 5 hours a night. So as part of the what's considered a normative aging process, not that it has to be this case for everyone, and there's things that you could do about it, but that sleep becomes a much shorter period of your life, and it also becomes much less solid. Those of you who have kids know that mostly when kids are infants and young, they sleep like a rock. You could pick them up and move them anywhere, and they're going to stay asleep. But as we age, we begin to sleep. Our sleep is really light and fragmented. We have much less what's called that slow wave non-REM sleep. We don't have as much of that. We don't have as much deep sleep. And so once you show people that it's kind of normative for at 75 for them to be sleeping, say, 6 hours a night, they were incredibly relieved because the most general public tends to believe that this 8-hour night average should be throughout the lifespan. So that doesn't work that way. So that's one interesting thing about sleep. Sleep becomes more fragmented and less a part of a 24-hour day as we age, and that is just considered a normal process of aging. Again, I don't mean to sound fatalistic. I mean, there's probably hormones and various meds that you could take to steady that sleep out, but all things being equal, it decreases and becomes fragmented. So that's one of the normal things. So let me just, I'm going to show you a little teeny bit here about sleep architecture. I want to check my video, make sure it's still shooting, and see how much time we have on this. Okay. Yeah, I think I could go on. Everything looks good. Everything looks good on that. So let me go to another page here. So to understand sleep disorders, it's really important to understand a normal sleep, what's called sleep architecture. In other words, what happens to somebody in a normal night of sleep. And what's really was shocking to me when I worked in the sleep clinic was that how much we all are the same in terms of what our body is doing when we fall asleep and go through these various stages of sleep. So, but what we did in the sleep lab was have people hooked up to a polygraphic system with various electrodes. Again, these aren't electrodes that stick under your skin. They're very light. And after one night, the person is pretty much completely desensitized to them. And a person is actually, nowadays, is mobile with these electrodes because they work through wirelessly. So what happens is as we're falling asleep, the strangest thing happens to almost all of us. Our eyes start rolling slowly back and forth. And so in this polygraph machine, we're actually measuring what the eyes are doing, and the eyes that have been darting around start rolling slowly back and forth. Rolling slowly back and forth. And this seems to be like the initiation of sleep. Now, while we were awake here, we also record the EEG. So let's just do one here fully awake. The awake EEG is fast, sharp. It looks like that. You don't need to know all the details, but it's called beta waves because it's what's called a very desynchronized brainwave. In other words, many different parts of our brains are not necessarily working in unison when we're awake. We're scanning a lot of information, processing a lot of sensory input and other things. So this is the awake state. As we start falling asleep here, the EEG, again this is EEG, begins to become more what's called synchronized. It begins to have these what look like more rhythmic processes. And we go through something called stage 1 sleep, and stage 2, and stage 3, and stage 4, and then REM. So let me show you what the EEG does. The EEG, as we go down these stages, keeps getting bigger. Believe it or not, what this is about is the cells in our brain are beginning to fire more together. They're becoming more synchronized. As in, if I had you all put your hands up and you were waving them erratically, that all look different. But if I said up, down, the brain is starting to synchronize. And then we get down here to further stages going along. And let's see, stage 1, 2, 3, and continue here, stage 4. This is called delta sleep. This is the slowest wave sleep. Delta sleep. And then we hit REM after the total of all this is about 60 minutes. And all of a sudden, kablooey! It's just like awake, as you would expect. REM sleep is beta. It looks just like when you're awake. So when you're in REM, you're in an awake brain, and it turns out to be an awake central nervous system to a great extent in terms of your breathing and your pulse. But you're in, interestingly, a paralyzed body. This is one of the really interesting things, and it helps also explain several sleep disorders. The difference between REM sleep and non-REM sleep in terms of muscle tone. When you're awake, obviously we have lots of muscle activity. So this is muscle, right here, M-U-S-C-L-E. So muscle, when we're awake, is active. And what happens is as we start falling asleep, or our eyes start, oh, by the way, when you hit REM, all of a sudden your eyes start darting around. Boom, 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 they're all over the place. I didn't say that. That's the rapid eye movements. But anyways, muscles, which are measured, something called EMG, electromyogram, muscles are very active, but when you fall asleep, the muscles relax, but you still have what's called muscle tone when you're in non-REM. When you see a child or yourself, or if you look at your dog sleeping or a cat, they'll be asleep, but they'll still be holding their head up a little bit. Their head will be up like this. But when they hit REM, there is no muscle tone. The body has what's cataplexy. It goes into a complete state of paralysis. During REM sleep, there's no muscle tone. So what happens is, again, the body is essentially paralyzed, and so we're in an awake mind, and appears the eye movements are parallel with the dream images, and the respiration is, and the pulse is, and in a completely paralyzed body. It's fascinating. So then what happens, about 30 minutes of that, and yep, still good. About 30 minutes of that, and then that's a 90-minute total cycle, and you wake up right after REM. You always wake up. Everybody wakes up. Often you don't remember it, and the only way you remember your dreams is to wake up in the dreams. But you wake up out of REM, and then you start this cycle again. Okay, so one other little bit here in terms of normal sleep architecture. I said that it's about 60 minutes of non-REM followed by 30 minutes of REM. But it turns out that was a slight distortion, because earlier in the night you have more non-REM and less REM, but as each cycle goes through the night, and you have 4 or 5, maybe 6 cycles, you have more and more REM, to the point where by your 5th or 6th cycle, like that day, that Sunday, or whatever day it is that you really sleep in, your REM is up to probably 50% of your sleep time instead of a third. probably at least 50%. So there's a real good chance that you wake up out of dreams when you get to sleep in. And that's why I think most of you are saying, wow, when I sleep in, I seem to be dreaming so much. It's because you are dreaming much more as the night goes on. So again, you're awake, your brain is awake, you start falling asleep, your eyes rotate, your brain waves start synchronizing, your muscles start relaxing. You do that through this deeper and deeper sleep, and then REM sleep, brain wakes up, body is essentially paralyzed. So that I'm going to stop the tape now. We're going to go on to just the third and final section where I'm going to point out what happens with these various sleep disorders when this is not functioning the way it typically does. So let me stop this.